The hood was a lie she told herself would be enough. Ilara had stitched it from scraps of burial linen, cloth meant for the dead, because that was what she intended to become tonight. Invisible, forgotten. A ghost standing among the living, passed over like the nothing they had always told her she was. She stood in the last row of the choosing hall, pressed between two stone pillars where the firelight barely reached, her face swallowed by the deep cowl she had pulled low enough to cover everything but her lips. Her hands were steady, her pulse was not. Around her, the noble daughters of the Western Pax gleamed like polished blades, silk gowns in deep jewel tones, throats bared in submission and invitation, hair braided with silver thread, wrists perfumed with crushed moonflower. They had been prepared for this since birth, groomed, displayed, offered. Every one of them wanted to be seen. Ilara would rather have been buried alive.
The choosing ceremony happened once a generation, when an Alpha King reached his 30th year without a bonded mate, and the council demanded he select. Kael Ashenmere had refused for 6 years. 6 years of silence, of iron rule, of a throne room so cold that servants whispered frost grew on the armrests, even in summer. 6 years of no laughter in the great hall, no warmth in the king's quarters, no Luna beside the carved wolf throne that had sat empty since the night his mother died in it. Tonight, the council had forced his hand. 43 women from every allied pack stood in the great hall of Ashenmere Fortress, arranged in rows like offerings on an altar. Ilara was the 44th, not offered but ordered. Her stepfather, Lord Harren of the Grey Mist pack, had dragged her here as a final humiliation. Not because he believed she would be chosen, because he wanted the court to see what Grey Mist discarded. She was Omega, the lowest. A scrub maid with scarred hands and a back that bore the particular cruelty of a man who believed discipline was a language spoken through leather belts. Harren had not even given her a gown. She wore her work dress, rough grey wool, fraying at the hem, and the hood she had sewn in secret, her one act of rebellion. If she could not escape the hall, she would escape their eyes. The massive iron doors at the far end groaned open, and the hall fell silent with the abruptness of a snuffed candle. Kael Ashenmere entered like winter entering a room, felt before seen. He was taller than the stories claimed, broader. His dark hair was cut close, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and his eyes, Ilara could see them even from the back of the hall, were the pale, luminous grey of a frozen lake. Beautiful and utterly empty. He wore black from throat to boot, no crown, no adornment, as though the ceremony disgusted him too much to dress for it. His beta, a scarred mountain of a man called Draven, walked 2 steps behind him with the expression of someone escorting a prisoner to execution. The Alpha King did not speak. He descended the 3 steps from the dais and began to walk the rows. Ilara watched through the narrow gap between her hood and her chin as the noble daughters performed. Curtsies, lowered lashes, necks tilted in perfect submission. One woman, a tall, copper-haired daughter of the Silvervein pack, spoke his name like a prayer. He walked past her without slowing. He walked past all of them. His expression never changed. Those frozen eyes swept each face and found nothing. No recognition, no spark, no reaction from the wolf that paced behind his ribs. The hall grew quieter with each row he cleared. Ilara could feel the anxiety thickening the air like smoke. The council members on the dais exchanged glances. Draven's hand moved to rest on the pommel of his sword, a habit born from years of reading his king's moods.
Second row cleared. Third. Fourth. He was getting closer. Elara pressed deeper into the shadow between the pillars. She made herself small, shoulders curved, chin tucked, hands clasped tight beneath the folds of her cloak. She regulated her breathing the way she did when Harren's footsteps approached her door at night. Shallow, silent, absent. Do not see me. Do not see me. Do not. He stopped. The Alpha King of Ashenmere stopped 3 feet from where she stood, and every molecule of air in the great hall seemed to crystallize. He was not looking at the woman beside her. He was not looking at the pillar. He was looking at the hooded figure pressed into the dark, like a creature trying to melt through stone. And something in his face, something behind those dead, frozen eyes, shifted. His wolf had gone completely still. Then it surged forward with a force that made his chest expand, his pupils blow wide, his breath catch audibly in the silence. His hands that had crushed throats and shattered bone, curled slowly at his sides, and a sound rumbled from somewhere deep in his chest. Not a growl, not a command. Something older, something that had no name in any human language. The entire hall heard it. Elara did not move, could not move. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to shrink, to disappear, to become the nothing she had trained herself to be. But her body would not obey. Something anchored her feet to the stone floor. Something warm and terrifying was blooming beneath her ribs, spreading through her veins like molten gold. And her wolf, the wolf she had never been able to shift into, the wolf she had been told was broken, defective, dead, stirred for the first time in her 23 years of life. Kale took 1 step closer, then another. The crowd parted around him like water around the prow of a warship. He stood before her now, so close she could see the faint scar that traced his collarbone above the black fabric, could feel the heat radiating from his skin, despite every rumor that the cursed king ran cold as a corpse. He raised his hand. Every woman in the hall held her breath. His fingers found the edge of her hood, rough burial linen, stitched unevenly, the desperate craft of someone who had no one to teach her. And he paused, just for a moment. His thumb brushed the fabric, and she could have sworn his hand trembled. Then he pulled the hood down, gently, so gently it made her throat ache. Firelight hit her face for the first time, the bruise along her left cheekbone, fading to yellow. The sharp, elegant bones beneath skin that had known too little food and too much fear. Brown eyes, wide and defiant and terrified in equal measure, staring up at the most powerful wolf alive. Kale looked at her. The frozen lake of his eyes cracked. "It's you." 2 words, barely a whisper. But the great hall of Ashenmere Fortress had the acoustics of a cathedral, and every wolf present heard them land like a hammer on glass. Then the silence shattered into chaos. "That is the Grey Mist Omega." Lord Harren's voice cut through the noise, sharp with disbelief and something uglier. Panic. He shoved forward from the back of the hall, his face mottled red. "Your Majesty, there has been a mistake. She is nobody. She is nothing. She was brought here as... She was not meant to be in the selection. I will remove her immediately." "You will not touch her." Kale had not raised his voice. He did not need to. The words carried the weight of absolute authority,
and the temperature in the hall dropped so sharply that breath became visible. His eyes never left Alara's face, but his next words were directed at the hall. "My wolf has chosen. The bond is recognized." "She is Omega," Harren pressed, his voice climbing. "She cannot shift. She is defective, broken. She is not fit to stand in your presence, let alone—" "Lord Harren." Draven's voice landed like a boot on gravel. "You were told not to touch her. You are now being told not to speak. I would not test a third instruction." Harren's mouth worked soundlessly. Around him, the noble daughters and their families stared in varying shades of horror, fascination, and barely concealed fury. The copper-haired, silver-veined daughter looked as though she had swallowed a live coal. Alara had not spoken, had not moved. She stood where the hood had left her, exposed, bruised, trembling once despite her best effort not to, and stared at the Alpha King, who had just upended the entire social order of 5 kingdoms, because something behind his ribs recognized something behind hers. "What is your name?" His voice was quieter now, closer to human. She swallowed, found it. "Alara." Something flickered across his face. Pain, recognition, wonder. She could not pass it, and he extended his hand. Not a demand, not a command. An open palm, offered downward, the way you would reach for something fragile. "Come with me, Alara." She looked at his hand. She looked at the hall full of wolves, who would have watched her be dragged away without a word. She looked at Harren, whose face had gone the particular shade of white that preceded violence. She placed her hand in the king's. His fingers closed around hers, and the cold she had always heard surrounded him. The frost on armrests, the chill in corridors, was not there. His hand was warm, warmer than anything she had touched in years. And the moment their skin connected, something pulsed between them, a current that made the candles in the hall flicker, and the wolves nearest to them take an involuntary step back. Kale felt it too. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his breath caught, the way his eyes, for one unguarded second, looked not cold, but stunned, as if he had been standing in darkness for so long that even a single flame was blinding. He led her from the hall without another word. Behind them, the court erupted. The fortress was exactly as the rumors described. Cold stone, dark corridors, a kingdom built to endure rather than comfort. But Alara noticed what the rumors missed. Dead torches in brackets along the walls, as though no one had bothered to light them in years. A garden visible through an arched window, barren and frozen despite the summer warmth outside the fortress walls. A great hearth in the corridor outside the king's quarters, stacked with wood that showed no trace of ash. Nothing had burned here in a long time. Kale brought her to a chamber adjoined to his own. It was sparse but clean. A bed with furs, a basin, a window overlooking the dead garden. He released her hand at the threshold and stepped back, putting deliberate distance between them. "You are not a prisoner," he said. His voice had returned to that controlled, measured cadence. The voice of a king, not the man who had whispered, "It's you." "You will have attendance, freedom of movement within the fortress. Meals, whatever you require." "Why?" The word left her before she could stop it. Not grateful, not frightened, genuinely asking. His jaw worked. For a moment, she thought he would not answer.
Because my wolf chose you. And in 600 years, my wolf has chosen nothing. The number landed like a stone dropped into still water. 600 years, she repeated quietly.
I was cursed before the last dynasty fell. He said it flatly, the way someone describes weather. The Ashenmere bloodline carries a darkness bound to the firstborn son. I do not sleep. I do not feel warmth. I do not age, and I do not die. And I have not felt anything: pleasure, comfort, tenderness, peace, since I was 19 years old. The throne was not given to me. It grew around me like scar tissue because no one else survived long enough to sit in it. The silence that followed was vast. Elara looked at him, truly looked, past the power, past the authority, past the face that could have been carved from the same stone as his fortress. She saw the exhaustion, not physical, something deeper. The weariness of a man who had lived long enough to watch everything he loved turn to dust, and then kept living anyway, because the curse would not let him stop. "You must be so tired," she said. It was not the right thing to say. It was not strategic or deferential or wise. It was simply true, spoken with the quiet clarity of someone who understood bone-deep exhaustion. Cale stared at her. His throat moved. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then, so briefly she might have imagined it, his composure fractured. Not dramatically, not with a sound, just a crack in the stone, a single fissure that revealed something raw and bewildered beneath. He left without another word. His door closed, and Elara heard, very faintly through the stone wall, a sound she could not identify. It took her several minutes to realize it was a man remembering how to breathe. The days that followed moved in strange, guarded rhythms. Cale assigned her a maid, Marin, a round-faced woman of 40 with kind eyes and a habit of leaving extra bread on Elara's tray. Marin was the first person in Ashenmere to speak to her without suspicion or contempt. And Elara clung to those small mercies, the way she once clung to the silence between Harren's rages. If you're enjoying this tale of the cursed king and the woman who was never meant to be seen, take a moment to show your love by liking this video. It tells me you want more stories like this one. The court, however, was a different creature entirely. Lady Sarath, the king's chief advisor and the most powerful woman in Ashenmere before Elara's arrival, made her opposition known within the first day. She was sharp-featured and elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair and the calculating stillness of a predator choosing its moment. She had served as the king's advisor for 3 centuries, managed his household, negotiated his treaties and, according to the whispers Marin relayed, expected to be named Luna by political arrangement when the choosing ceremony concluded. Instead, the king had chosen a bruised Omega in a burial cloth hood. Sarath said nothing publicly. She did not need to. Her silence was its own weapon, a refusal to acknowledge Elara's presence that communicated volumes to every wolf watching. But her moves were precise. Elara found her meals delayed, then cold. Her access to the library revoked on a technicality of rank. An invitation to the pack's evening gathering rescinded because, Sarath explained smoothly, the Omega lacks the appropriate standing to attend a function of state, regardless of the king's personal interests. Cale noticed. Elara saw it in the way his gaze tracked Sarath during council meetings, the way his jaw set when Elara arrived late to the Great Hall, because no one had told her the schedule had changed. But he said nothing, and Elara understood. With the clarity of someone who had survived a household of cruelty, that a king who fought every battle for her
would only confirm what the court already believed, that she was weak, that she needed protecting, that she did not belong here. So she fought her own wars. When Serath's allies excluded her from meals, she ate in the kitchens with the servants and learned the names of every cook and scullery worker in the fortress. When the library was close to her, she found Maren's personal collection of histories and read by candlelight. When whispers followed her through corridors, Omega, defective, charity case, she walked with her spine straight and her eyes forward, and refused to give them the flinch they were waiting for. And every evening, without ceremony or explanation, she found herself outside the dead garden. It drew her in ways she could not articulate. 3 acres of frozen earth behind the fortress, enclosed by high stone walls, visible from the window of her chamber. Every other garden in Ashenmere showed signs of summer, green, growth, the stubborn vitality of living things. This one was white, not snow, frost. A thick crystalline frost that coated every branch, every stone path, every dormant root, as though winter itself had crawled inside the walls and refused to leave. It froze the night the curse took hold, Maren told her, catching Elara staring through the window one morning. 600 years ago. They say it was the Queen's garden, the King's mother. She planted every flower herself. He used to play there as a boy. Elara said nothing. But that night, she pressed her palm against the frozen gate, and the frost beneath her fingers thinned. Just slightly. Just enough to feel the iron underneath. She told no one. The private confrontation happened on the 9th night. Elara had gone to the king's study to return a book Maren had borrowed on her behalf. The corridor was empty, the hour late, and she had not expected to find him there. But the door was open, and candlelight spilled across the stone floor. And Cale sat at his desk with his head in his hands. The posture so unlike the iron-spined king she had observed that she stopped mid-step. He sensed her immediately. Of course he did. His head came up, and for one unguarded second, she saw everything. The pain, the exhaustion, the 6 centuries of carrying a crown that burned and a body that would not die. Then the mask slammed back into place. You should not be here. You left your door open. A pause, almost imperceptible. That was not an invitation. And yet here I am. She set the book on the edge of his desk. You are in pain tonight, worse than usual. His eyes narrowed. How would you know what is usual? Because I watch you. The words came out before she considered their weight. In the silence that followed, she felt heat rise along her neck, but did not retract them. The way you hold your left shoulder when the cold tightens. The way you stop speaking mid-sentence in council when it flares. The way you... She stopped herself, swallowed. I notice. Cale stood. The chair scraped against stone, and suddenly the room felt much smaller. He was tall, impossibly tall up close, and the candlelight carved shadows beneath his cheekbones that made him look less like a king and more like something from the old stories. Something dangerous and desperately sad. Why? The word was rough, almost angry. Why do you watch me? What do you want from this? Nothing. Everyone wants something. I want nothing from you, Cale. It was the first time she had used his name without his title, and they both felt it land. I know what it looks like when someone is in pain and has decided they deserve it. I have worn that expression. I am not trying to fix you or earn your favor. I simply refuse to pretend I do not see it. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides. Not threatening, or not only threatening. There was something desperate in the movement, something that cracked through the control he wore like armor. He stood close enough that she could feel the heat of him. And it was heat, not the cold everyone spoke of, a furnace burning behind walls of ice. And his hand rose to her face. His fingers hovered a breath from her jaw, not touching, trembling. "If I touch you," he said, and his voice was a ruin, "the curse will know. It will tighten. It will find what I care about and it will use it against me. The way it has used everything. The way it used..." He stopped. His hand dropped. His eyes, those frozen grey expanses, were no longer empty. They were full. Overfull. The eyes of a man standing at the edge of something vast and terrified of falling. "Then do not touch me," Elara whispered. "Just stay." They stood in that room for an hour, not speaking, not touching, breathing the same air, existing in the same warm silence. And it was the most intimate thing either of them had experienced in longer than they could measure. When Elara finally returned to her chamber, she passed the dead garden. A single green shoot had broken through the frost. The detonation came at the autumn court, the formal gathering where the Alpha King presented matters of state to the assembled pack lords. Sarath had been waiting for this. She stood before the court in silver and black, her voice carrying the practiced authority of centuries, and presented a petition signed by 14 pack lords demanding that the Alpha King submit to the trial of suitability, an ancient rite unused in 400 years that required any unclaimed Luna to prove her worth through a series of challenges designed for high-born wolves. Challenges that required shifting. "The law is clear," Sarath said, her tone honeyed and lethal. "An unbonded female residing in the king's household must demonstrate her capacity to serve the pack. If she cannot shift, she cannot protect. If she cannot protect, she cannot rule. And if she cannot rule..." Her gaze found Elara in the gallery, and her smile was a blade. "She must be removed." The hall rumbled with approval. 14 lords, a law older than the fortress itself, and a challenge that required the one thing Elara had never been able to do. Kale's hand gripped the armrest of his throne so hard the wood cracked beneath his fingers. His eyes blazed, not grey now, but silver-white, the wolf pressing forward with predatory fury. Draven stepped closer to the throne, reading the violence building in his king. "You will withdraw this petition," Kale said, and his voice was no longer human. "The law supersedes the crown in matters of lunar succession." Sarath did not flinch. She had been preparing for this for weeks. "Even you cannot override the ancient rites, Your Majesty." It was true, and every wolf in the hall knew it. Elara stood in the gallery with Marin's hand on her arm and felt the trap close around her. A trial she could not pass, a law she could not fight, and a king whose hands were bound by the very power he wielded. But beneath the fear, beneath the familiar cold of being cornered, something else stirred. The same warmth she had felt when Kale pulled down her hood. The same pulse she had felt at the garden gate. Her wolf, silent for 23 years, dormant, dismissed as dead, pressed against the inside of her ribs and growled. Not in fear, in recognition. 3 days later, Elara stood in the garden at midnight and placed both hands on the frozen earth. She was not sure what she was doing.
She had no training, no guidance, no understanding of the power that had been flickering at the edges of her awareness since the night of the choosing. She only knew that the frost responded to her, that the green shoot had become three, that when she pressed her palms to the dead soil, something answered, something old and warm and patient that had been waiting for exactly this. The frost cracked. Not gently. The sound split the night like a thunderclap, and warmth erupted from the earth beneath her hands, racing outward in a wave that sent crystalline shards flying like shattered glass. Vines moved, roots stirred. A rose bush, 6 centuries dead, shuddered and unfurled a single white bud. And inside the fortress, Cale Ashenmere gasped and pressed his hand to his chest. Because for the first time in 600 years, he felt warmth there. Real warmth. Not the ghost of a memory, not the echo of what feeling used to be. Warmth. Actual and undeniable, spreading from the place behind his ribs where the bond lived. He found her in the garden. She was kneeling in thawed earth, her hands black with soil, her eyes wide with shock and wonder, and a light that was not entirely human. Around her, a circle of green spread outward through the frost. Small, defiant, alive. Ilara. His voice broke on her name like a wave on rocks. She looked up at him. I think your mother's garden has been waiting for someone to ask it to wake up. He knelt. In the dirt, in the dark, the Alpha King of Ashenmere knelt before the Omega who could not shift, and took her soil-blackened hands in his and held them against his chest. You feel that? He asked. His voice was shaking. The most powerful wolf alive, and his voice was shaking. She felt it, his heartbeat, steady, strong, and warm. It has not felt warm in 600 years, he said. Not until you. He kissed her, not gently, though it began that way, his mouth finding hers with the careful restraint of a man terrified of breaking something. But the bond surged between them, a current of gold and heat and centuries of starved longing, and restraint dissolved like frost in sunlight. He kissed her like a man remembering what it meant to be alive, and she kissed him back like a woman who had finally found the place she was not required to be small. The garden bloomed around them. Roses, moonflowers, night jasmine. 600 years of dormant life erupting in a silent, furious cascade of white and green and silver. The frost retreated. The walls of ice thinned. And somewhere, deep in the foundation of Ashenmere Fortress, something that had been frozen for 6 centuries cracked. The trial of suitability took place at dawn. Sarath presided with barely concealed triumph. The 14 lords lined the training grounds. The pack assembled, and Ilara stood in the center of the ring, wearing the simple grey dress she had arrived in, and felt strangely calm. The first trial requires the candidate to demonstrate her wolf, Sarath announced. If she cannot shift, she will shift. Cale's voice came from the dais, absolute and certain. Ilara closed her eyes. She reached inward, past the fear, past the years of being told she was broken, past Harren's belt and Harren's words, and the cage of smallness she had built around herself to survive. She reached for the warmth, the pulse, the thing that had stirred in the choosing hall and grown in the garden and bloomed when Cale kissed her. Her wolf answered. The shift was not violent. It was not painful. It was like opening a door that had always been there, hidden behind a wall she had been taught was permanent. Light rippled across her skin, her bones reshaped with fluid grace. And where an omega had stood, a wolf now rose.
She was white, pure, luminous white, her coat shimmering with an iridescence that caught the dawn light and scattered it like prisms. She was not the largest wolf present, but every wolf in the ring felt it. The power that rolled off her in waves, ancient and warm and unmistakably royal. A moonblood wolf, the bloodline of the first pack, extinct for 700 years. The silence that swallowed the training grounds was absolute. Sarath's face drained of colour. The 14 lords stared. Draven, standing at the edge of the ring, began to laugh. A low, incredulous sound that built until his shoulders shook. The Moonblood line, he said, was prophesied to break the Ashenmere curse. That is why the curse targeted them. That is why they were hunted to extinction. His gaze moved to Sarath, and the laughter died. 700 years ago, when you were the king's advisor then too. Every eye turned to Sarath, and the Lara, in her wolf form, standing in the dawn light, with power singing through every fibre of her being, watched as the woman who had orchestrated the extinction of her bloodline, who had maintained the curse that imprisoned Kale for 6 centuries, who had systematically ensured that no moonblood wolf would ever reach the Alpha King, finally ran out of shadows to hide in. You bound the curse to his bloodline, Kale said, rising from the dais. His voice was devastatingly quiet. You told my father it was an enemy's hex. You hunted the only wolves who could break it. And when I survived every attempt to destroy me, you stayed close. You managed my court. You controlled my access. You made certain I would never find her. Sarath's composure cracked like thin ice. I kept this kingdom stable for 6 centuries. Without me, without you, I would have lived. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Guards, take her to the dungeon. She will answer to the council for treason against the crown, conspiracy to murder the Moonblood bloodline, and the enslavement of a king. Sarath was dragged from the training grounds in chains, screaming promises and threats that no one listened to. The 14 lords who had signed her petition found sudden interest in the dirt at their feet. Several knelt. Elara shifted back. She stood in the center of the ring, human again, barefoot, her grey dress torn at the seams from the shift. I met the eyes of every wolf who had called her nothing. She said one thing. I was never broken. I was hidden. And I am done being small. The autumn court reconvened that afternoon for a coronation no one had expected. Kale placed the Luna's crown on Elara's head himself. It was old, ancient silver wrought with crescent moons and wolf teeth, and according to legend, it burned anyone unworthy who wore it. It did not burn Elara. It hummed. A low, resonant vibration that every wolf in the great hall felt in their bones. My Luna, Kale said, and his voice cracked on the word, because it was the first title he had ever spoken that felt true. My mate. My cure. He kissed her in front of the entire court. Not a political gesture, not a performance. A man who had not felt warmth in 6 centuries, pressing his mouth to the woman who had returned it to him, and the great hearth behind the throne, dead for 600 years, stacked with wood that had never been lit, erupted into flame. The hall gasped. Elara pulled back from the kiss and looked at the fire, looked at the wolf throne, where frost was retreating from the carved armrests, looked at her king, whose grey eyes were no longer the colour of a frozen lake, but the colour of morning mist,
still pale, still striking, but alive with warmth. "Welcome home," she whispered. 3 months later, the dead garden was unrecognizable. Roses climbed the stone walls in cascades of white and crimson. Night jasmine perfumed the corridors so thoroughly that visiting dignitaries commented on it before they reached the gate. The frozen paths had given way to gravel walkways lined with lavender and sage. And at the center of the garden, where Alara had first pressed her hands to the earth, a moonflower tree grew, silver-barked, luminous, its blossoms opening only at night. The fortress itself had changed. Torches burned in every bracket. The great hearth roared from dawn to midnight. The servants moved faster, spoke louder, smiled more freely. Ashenmere was no longer a tomb. It was a court, warm, vital, fiercely loyal to the Luna who had walked in wearing burial cloth and walked out wearing a crown. Kale slept now. Actually slept. Deep, dreamless, warm, with Alara curled against his chest and his face buried in her hair. The first time it happened, he woke in a panic, convinced the curse had found a new way to torment him. Then he felt her heartbeat against his ribs and remembered. It was over. It was truly over. A letter arrived from the grey mist territory on a grey morning in late autumn. Marin brought it on the breakfast tray with a raised eyebrow and a carefully neutral expression. Alara opened it at the table while Kale watched over the rim of his cup. Lord Harren's handwriting had deteriorated. The letter was 2 pages of grovelling. Apologies for his treatment of her, praise for her strength and grace, a declaration that he had always known she was destined for greatness. He requested permission to visit the court. He hoped she remembered his generosity in bringing her to the choosing ceremony. He signed it, "Your devoted stepfather." Alara read it once. She read it twice. Then she folded it neatly, walked to the great hearth, and fed it to the flames. "Feel good?" Kale asked from the table. She returned to her seat, took a sip of tea and considered. "Warm," she said. It felt warm. His smile, still rare, still hard-won, still the most breathtaking thing she had ever seen, spread slowly across his face. Outside the window, the moonflower trees swayed in a breeze that smelled of jasmine and wood smoke, and the particular sweetness of a world remembering how to grow. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you listening tonight? Tell me in the comments. If this story made your heart race even once, share it with someone who needs a world to escape into. And, if you are not yet subscribed, come join us. There are more stories waiting, and every single one was written for you.